I never thought my life would be defined by betrayal, but as I sit here now recounting every jagged shard of memory, I realize betrayal became the thread that stitched together my story. My name is Claire. I am 38 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that family was sacred, that the bond between sisters could weather anything. I clung to that belief like a prayer until the day my sister Vanessa proved me wrong in ways I could never have imagined. I wasn't born into wealth. My father was a hardworking man who carried the weight of two jobs just to keep food on the table. And my mother was a gentle spirit who taught me how to find beauty in the smallest of things, a wildflower growing from cracked pavement, or the way the sunlight could make a chipped teacup glow like crystal. Vanessa, my older sister by 4 years, had always been different from me. Where I was soft-spoken, she was sharp. Where I was patient, she was restless. She hated the smallness of our life, resented every second-hand dress, every holiday where we couldn't afford gifts as grand as our neighbors. Yet despite our differences, I loved her. I looked up to her even when she pushed me aside. I wanted to believe that beneath her hunger for more, she cared for me the way sisters should. That belief carried me into adulthood, and it blinded me when I should have seen the truth. When I met David, I thought I had found someone who finally saw me. He wasn't perfect. He carried his own scars from a childhood marked by absence, but he looked at me like I mattered, like I wasn't just Vanessa's quieter shadow. We met at a small cafe where I worked part-time to help pay for college. He was charming, attentive, and soon our lives entwined. For the first time, I felt like my world was expanding, like I had been chosen. Vanessa didn't approve. She said David wasn't ambitious enough, that he would never give me the life she thought I deserved. But beneath her disapproval, I saw something else flicker in her eyes, something darker, hungrier. I ignored it, convincing myself I was imagining things. I thought she would eventually accept him, that maybe she was only being protective. Years passed and David proposed. I remember the moment vividly. He knelt in the garden my mother had once tended, the scent of roses heavy in the evening air, his hand trembling as he slid the ring onto my finger. My heart overflowed with gratitude. I thought of all the times I had felt small, invisible, overlooked, and I realized this was my moment. My life was finally blooming. But bloom turned to ash faster than I could have imagined. The betrayal came quietly at first, whispers. I dismissed the way Vanessa lingered when David was around her. Laughter too sharp, his smiles too long. I told myself I was paranoid, that jealousy was making me see shadows where there were none. Until the night I walked into my father's house and found them together. The image is burned into me. Vanessa's hand on his chest, his lips on hers, both of them startled by my presence, but not enough to stop. My world shattered in that instant. My sister, my blood, the girl I had shared a bed with during thunderstorms, the one I had defended in schoolyard fights, she had taken the man I thought I would marry. David tried to speak, stammering excuses, but his eyes were already gone from me. And Vanessa, she didn't apologize. She smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile that told me she had won. I broke that night. I cried until my throat was raw, screamed into pillows, begged the heavens for an answer. My father tried to console me, his arms rough but warm, whispering that I deserved better. My mother had already passed by then, and I felt her absence like a gaping wound. I had no one else to lean on. Vanessa had taken not just my fiancé, but also the illusion that I mattered in her world. Years passed in a haze. I rebuilt slowly, piece by piece. Therapy, long walks, endless nights writing in journals just to make sense of the pain. I thought I had finally found some measure of peace when my father grew ill. His health declined rapidly, and before I could brace myself, I was planning his funeral. And that was where it all collided again, where past and present twisted together like a knife. At the funeral, Vanessa arrived draped in black silk, diamonds glittering at her throat. And beside her, David, my former fiancé, now her husband. My heart clenched when I saw them, but I stood tall. This was not the same broken girl they had destroyed years ago. Vanessa approached me with a smile that cut deeper than any blade. "Still alone, Claire?" She asked softly, her words coated in honey, but dripping with poison. You should have known David was too good for you. She looked around at the mourners, making sure they heard. My father's casket lay only feet away, and still, she chose that moment to mock me, to grind salt into wounds that had never fully healed. But what Vanessa didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't alone. I had rebuilt my life, found love where I least expected it, and discovered strength I never knew I had. As her laughter echoed across the funeral hall, I felt the weight of my secret pressing against my chest like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. And when the moment came when I finally revealed the truth, Vanessa's world would tremble. The funeral hall was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel like a betrayal. My father's casket draped in white lilies stood at the front. I had chosen those flowers because they were my mother's favorite, and I knew somewhere deep inside Dad would want her presence woven into his farewell. But as I stood there trying to hold my grief together like shards of broken glass, Vanessa's laughter shattered it all. She leaned against David's arm, her eyes scanning me like I was a stranger she had outgrown. I wanted to believe she had come to honor our father, but it was clear from the smug tilt of her chin that she came to prove a point. Her jewelry caught the dim light, glinting with every movement, as though to remind me of what she claimed was hers, the life she stole, the wealth she married into the man who once vowed himself to me. My hands trembled as I adjusted the black veil over my face. I could feel the eyes of distant relatives and old family friends, on me their pity palpable. They remembered what happened years ago. Some had whispered about it then, while others had looked away, unwilling to get involved in family matters. And now here they were, again pretending not to watch, as Vanessa's words sliced me open in public. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the rage and humiliation clawing its way up my throat. My father deserved my silence, my respect, not another spectacle. But Vanessa had always known where my softest parts lay, and she pressed her heel against them without hesitation. Funny, isn't it? She whispered loudly enough for the cluster of guests nearby to hear. Dad left you nothing but debts and heartache while I… She looked up at David, and he squeezed her hand in a performance of devotion, while I built a life worth envying. Her words hung in the air like smoke, toxic and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to drag her outside and demand why she hated me enough to do this, why she needed to humiliate me even at our father's funeral. But instead, I took a deep breath, letting my anger harden into something sharper, steadier. Because she was wrong. She thought I was still the broken girl who had wept into her pillow the night she stole David from me. She thought the years had left me small and defeated. What she didn't know was that I had built a life far stronger than the one she flaunted. She didn't know that the man I had chosen now wasn't just my partner, but someone who embodied loyalty and strength in ways David never could. And soon she would, but not yet. The pastor's voice filled the room, solemn and reverent. I tried to focus on his words, but my mind kept drifting. I remembered Dad's voice when I told him about Vanessa and David all those years ago. He had been furious not at me, but at them. His face had gone pale and his hands had trembled as he muttered, "How could she? How could my own daughter do this?" Yet he had never confronted her, never pushed her away. He told me once, "Blood is complicated, Claire. Sometimes love has to exist, even when it's undeserved." I carried that with me even when it hurt. Even now, as Vanessa desecrated his farewell with cruelty, I wondered if he would want me to forgive her. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. When the service ended, mourners drifted into small groups murmuring condolences. I stood by the casket, my hand resting on its polished wood, whispering a goodbye only I could hear. That's when Vanessa approached again, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown. "You know," she said softly, her tone dripping with false sympathy, "if you had listened to me years ago, maybe you wouldn't be standing here alone, but you never were good at choosing, were you?" Her smirk widened as she tucked her hand through David's arm. He looked away, almost ashamed, but not enough to step back. I turned to her, my voice steady though my chest burned. "You think you've won, Vanessa, but life isn't finished with us yet." She laughed, tilting her head back, making sure the guests nearby could hear. "Oh, Claire, always so dramatic. You'll never change." And maybe she was right, I hadn't changed in the way she meant, but I had changed in the ways that mattered. As she turned away, I let my eyes wander across the room, and then they found him. Marcus, my husband. He stood near the entrance, tall, calm, his dark suit impeccable, his gaze steady on me. When our eyes met, the storm inside me quieted. He nodded, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. No one here knew about us yet. We had chosen to keep our marriage private until after Dad's passing, partly to protect his fragile health, partly because I didn't owe the world my happiness. But as Marcus stepped closer, I saw Vanessa's laughter falter. Her eyes narrowed, her grip on David tightening, as if she sensed something slipping beyond her control. The game was changing, though she didn't know it yet. I straightened my back, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation. I had endured years of silence, swallowed bitterness that nearly poisoned me. But now with Marcus beside me, I was ready. Ready to reveal the truth, ready to let her feel even a fraction of the humiliation she had forced upon me. And when that moment came, she wouldn't be laughing anymore. Marcus moved toward me with the kind of calm strength that seemed to silence even the air around him. He wasn't flashy like David, nor did he need to be. His presence spoke for itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a gaze that could strip pretense away from anyone, it was the kind of quiet authority that made people stand a little straighter when he walked into a room. I felt the tension ripple through the guests as they noticed him, their whispers rising like rustling leaves. Vanessa's smirk faltered, her eyes darting between Marcus and me, confusion blooming across her face. She clung tighter to David's arm as if grounding herself. Marcus reached me and without hesitation placed his hand gently on mine. The warmth of his touch steadied me, his thumb brushing against my skin in reassurance. Then he spoke, his voice deep, but even carrying effortlessly through the hall. "I'm sorry for your loss, Claire," he said, though his eyes told me the words were meant for more than just grief. They were a reminder, a vow, a declaration that I was no longer carrying any burden alone. The room fell quiet, every head turned toward us, and then finally I spoke. For those who don't know, I said, my voice stronger than I expected, "This is my husband, Marcus." Gasps fluttered through the mourners. Some looked surprised, others curious, and a few smiled softly, recognizing something genuine when they saw it. But my gaze never left Vanessa. I wanted to see her reaction. Her eyes widened, her lips parting as though she'd been slapped. "Your husband?" she stammered, her voice cracking in disbelief. "Yes," I answered firmly, lifting my chin. "My husband, the man I chose, the man who chose me." The words echoed louder than I intended, but I didn't regret them. They were a balm against years of being made to feel unworthy, a shield against Vanessa's poison. David shifted uncomfortably beside her. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. He knew Marcus not personally, but by reputation. Marcus was a respected businessman, one who had earned success with integrity, not shortcuts. He had been in negotiations that David once tried and failed to secure. I saw the recognition in David's eyes, the humiliation dawning, as he realized that the man standing by my side wasn't just any husband. He was the kind of man David could never be. Vanessa tried to recover, forcing a laugh that rang hollow. "Well, Claire, I suppose congratulations are in order, though I do wonder why you felt the need to keep him hidden. Afraid we'd think he was too good to be true." Her voice dripped with sarcasm, but I heard the tremor underneath. She was scrambling, trying to regain the upper hand. Marcus didn't flinch. He looked at her calmly, his expression unreadable, but firm. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "privacy is a form of strength. Not everything worth having needs to be displayed for validation." Vanessa's face flushed crimson, and I almost smiled. Marcus hadn't raised his voice, hadn't insulted her, but his words struck deeper than any insult could. I thought of my father then, how he would have smiled seeing me stand tall, how he would have approved of Marcus, a man who valued truth over appearances. And for the first time since we lowered him into that coffin, I felt a measure of peace. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She never was. She straightened her shoulders, her smile tight, eyes glittering with a dangerous edge. "Well, isn't this a twist? My little sister finally catching up. I suppose I should be happy for you, but let's not pretend this changes anything. David and I, She squeezed his arm like a trophy. We built a life together. A mansion, investments, a future. What do you have, Claire? A hidden marriage and a man who barely speaks. Her words hung heavy, cruel as ever. The guests shifted uncomfortably, caught between politeness and curiosity. I saw some of them exchange glances, whispering behind their hands. I wanted to lash out to remind her that love built on theft and cruelty could never last. But instead, I turned to Marcus, drawing strength from the steady way he held my hand. And I realized something: I didn't need to prove myself to her. My life, my happiness spoke louder than any defense I could muster. Still, I couldn't let her think she had the last word. "You're right, Vanessa," I said softly, my voice steady. "You built a life, but tell me how much of it was built on truth, and how much on betrayal, because one of those lasts and the other crumbles eventually." The silence that followed was sharper than any scream. Vanessa's smile flickered, her mask slipping for just a moment. I saw the doubt in her eyes, the fear that maybe, just maybe, her perfect life wasn't as solid as she wanted everyone to believe. I held her gaze, refusing to look away. For years I had let her dominate me, had shrunk under her shadow. Not anymore. As the reception drew on, I stayed close to Marcus, his presence a constant reminder of the strength I had gained. Vanessa avoided me for the rest of the evening. Her laughter forced her grip on David tighter than ever. She had wanted to humiliate me, but instead it was her pride that cracked under the weight of truth. That night, as I lay beside Marcus, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore outside our window, I whispered to him, "Thank you for being there, for standing with me." He turned, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Claire," he said gently, "you didn't need me to stand tall. You already were. I just made sure they saw it." His words sank deep, a healing salve over wounds that had bled for too long. I realized then that revenge wasn't just about exposing Vanessa's cruelty, it was about reclaiming myself piece by piece until there was nothing left for her to break. And though the night had ended, I knew this was only the beginning. Vanessa's mask had cracked, but the story wasn't finished. Not yet. The days after the funeral unfolded like a slow, unraveling thread, each one tugging at something fragile that Vanessa had tried desperately to keep intact. On the surface, she still played the role of the triumphant sister, the one who had the husband, the house, the glittering life. But once you've seen a mask slip, you start noticing every crack, every falter in the performance. And I noticed. It began with whispers. Old family friends who had attended the funeral started reaching out to me, their voices tinged with curiosity. "Claire," they'd say cautiously, "is it true your husband is Marcus Caldwell? The same Marcus who owns half the shipping contracts in the region?" I'd nod, and I'd see their brows lift, their tones change. Suddenly, the pity they once reserved for me transformed into respect. For years I had been the quiet one, the shadow left behind, but now people were realizing I hadn't been defeated. Vanessa must have sensed it too, because not long after she showed up at my door. I still remember the sound of her heels against my porch, the sharp click that once symbolized her confidence, but now rang of desperation. She looked immaculate as always, her black hair perfectly styled, her dress tailored within an inch of perfection, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted restless, and when she spoke, her voice lacked its usual venom. "Claire," she began, as though we were two sisters catching up, "I just wanted to talk." I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed. "Talk? Or remind me again of what you think you've won?" Her lips tightened, but she didn't lash out like I expected. Instead, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Things aren't perfect, okay, David and I, we've had some setbacks. Business hasn't been what we hoped." There it was, the first fissure. I should have felt pity, maybe even offered comfort. But all I could think of was that night years ago when she had kissed David in front of me, her smile triumphant, as if she'd stolen my entire future. That memory was a scar that still burned. "Setbacks happen," I said coolly. "But at least you chose him. You made your bed." Her eyes flashed with anger, but it vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. "You don't understand," she whispered, almost pleading. "We're drowning, Claire. The house, the cars, everything was built on loans. David's investments failed. We're close to losing it all." For a moment I stood stunned. The perfect mansion, the glittering wealth she paraded in front of me, It was all a facade. And now, like rotten wood beneath fresh paint, it was crumbling. "And why are you telling me this?" I asked softly. "Because—" Her voice cracked, and for the first time in years, she looked small. "Because Marcus could help us. I know who he is. I know what he can do. Please, maybe you could talk to him." I almost laughed, but it came out as something sharper, a bitter sound I didn't recognize as my own. The same sister who had mocked me at our father's funeral, who had stolen the man I once loved, was now standing on my porch, begging for the mercy of the life I had built. "Vanessa," I said, my tone cutting, "Marcus doesn't owe you anything, and neither do I." Her face paled, and for a second I saw something flicker, remorse maybe, or just fear. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Finally, she turned her heels, clicking away, each step heavier than the last. When I closed the door behind her, I leaned against it, my chest heaving. The revenge I had dreamed of for years had finally materialized, not in shouting or grand confrontations, but in this quiet, devastating reversal. I didn't need to destroy her. She was doing it herself. Over the next weeks, the cracks in Vanessa's life widened. Rumors spread of lawsuits against David, of failed deals, of creditors knocking at their door. At gatherings, the same relatives who once whispered about my humiliation now whispered about hers. And every time I felt that mixture of vindication and sadness twisting inside me, because no matter how much she hurt me, Vanessa was still my sister. And watching her unravel was like watching a part of my own history disintegrate. But then came the day that changed everything. She showed up again, but this time without the armor of makeup and silk. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her clothes rumpled, her voice trembling. She held something in her hands, an old leather-bound book. "It's Dad's journal," she said softly, holding it out to me. "I found it in his study. He left it for both of us." I hesitated, but finally I took it. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed. And when I opened it, my breath caught. It wasn't just a record of dates and events, it was his heart poured onto paper. His regrets, his hopes, his love for us. One entry stood out: "I fear the rivalry between my daughters will consume them. But I believe in them too. I believe that one day they will see each other not as enemies, but as survivors of the same storms. If there's one legacy I want to leave, it's this: forgive not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace." Tears blurred my vision. I closed the journal, clutching it to my chest. Vanessa watched me silent, her hands twisting nervously. For the first time in years, she didn't look like my enemy. She looked like my sister, the girl I once shared secrets with under the covers, the girl I once dreamed of running away with to escape our small-town life. But forgiveness isn't simple. Betrayal doesn't vanish with a single apology, and scars don't heal just because someone finally shows you their wounds. I stood there, torn between rage and sorrow, between the satisfaction of revenge and the longing for something deeper. And as I looked at Vanessa, broken and desperate, I realized the climax of our story wasn't about triumph or defeat. It was about choice. My choice. I held my father's journal against my chest, the weight of it heavier than anything Vanessa had ever thrown at me. The silence between us stretched thin, thick, with everything unsaid. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, even the sound of her unsteady breathing. My sister, the same woman who had stolen my fiancé, who had mocked me in front of mourners at our father's funeral, now stood in my living room, stripped of all her armor. For years I had dreamed of this moment. I thought I would relish it, that I would laugh in her face the way she once laughed in mine. I imagined slamming the door, turning my back, leaving her to drown in the ruin she had built. But standing there, I felt something I didn't expect: exhaustion. Revenge had sustained me, but it had also hollowed me. And as I looked at Vanessa, I realized no amount of vengeance would give me back the years I lost, the nights I cried, or the trust she shattered. I opened the journal again, reading one more line aloud, my voice trembling. "If you let anger define you, it will chain you forever. Let go, not for them, but for you." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in decades, I saw her without pretense, without cruelty. Just my sister broken. "Claire," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I don't know where else to go. I thought I had everything, and now it's all gone. I'm scared." Her words cut deeper than any insult. Because they were real. They weren't meant to wound me, they were confessions raw and unguarded. And suddenly I felt my father's presence around us, as though he were in the room waiting for my answer. I closed the journal and set it on the table. "Vanessa," I said softly, "you destroyed me once. You took what wasn't yours and gloated over my pain, and I let that pain define me for too long. I can't forget what you did, but maybe I can choose not to carry it anymore." Her tears spilled over, tracing dark lines through her makeup. She nodded as if accepting whatever I offered, even if it wasn't absolution. Marcus stepped into the room, then his steady gaze falling on both of us. He didn't speak, but his presence was grounding, reminding me of the life I had built beyond betrayal. I wasn't alone anymore, and I didn't need Vanessa to validate me. I turned back to her. "You need to figure out your life without tearing others down. Maybe that's your lesson. Mine is different. Mine is learning that I don't need revenge to heal. I need peace." The words tasted strange in my mouth, but once spoken, they settled into me like truth. Vanessa nodded again, her sobs quiet now. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. She picked up the journal from the table and held it close as if clinging to Dad's spirit. Then she left, her footsteps slow, almost hesitant. When the door shut behind her, I sank onto the couch, my body trembling with the release of years of rage. Marcus sat beside me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. I leaned into him, letting the silence wash over us. Later that night, I stood by the window watching the moonlight ripple across the ocean. I thought of my father, of his hopes, of the legacy he wanted for his daughters. He hadn't asked for perfection. He had asked for peace. And maybe in some small way, I had taken the first step toward giving him that. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It didn't mean forgetting. It meant releasing myself from the prison of bitterness. It meant choosing not to let Vanessa's betrayal define me anymore. That was my victory. In the weeks that followed, the distance between us remained. Vanessa faced the crumbling of her life with David, the consequences of their greed and deception. I didn't interfere. It wasn't my role to save her, nor did I wish her suffering. But I no longer felt chained to her downfall. I had my own life, my own love, my own peace. And when people asked me about her, about the sister who betrayed me, about the scandal at the funeral, about the shocking twist they had witnessed, I only said this: "She is my sister." And that is enough. Because the truth was, I had learned the most powerful revenge wasn't humiliation or cruelty. It was living a life so full, so authentic that no betrayal could erase it. I know some of you watching this might carry your own wounds, scars from family, from betrayal, from love that broke instead of healed. I want you to know something. Your pain does not define you. Your scars are proof that you survived, not proof that you are weak. You don't need to chase revenge to prove your worth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to release the bitterness and choose peace for yourself. That's what I did. And though my story began with betrayal, it doesn't end there. It ends with freedom. If my story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own battles and the strength you carry, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to leave a comment. I want to hear your stories too. Because none of us should carry our pain alone.